The city was a gleaming cage of steel and glass, its arteries choked with the endless pulse of traffic, its breath a constant, low hum of ambition and aspiration.
Arthur Thorne navigated its labyrinthine corridors with the practiced ease of a phantom. His suit, impeccably tailored, felt like a uniform for a role he no longer recognized, a second skin that masked the hollowness beneath.
At 38, Arthur had everything society declared desirable. A corner office overlooking the city's majestic skyline, a six-figure salary, a minimalist apartment decorated with art too abstract to stir any real emotion, and a roster of contacts that could open any door. Yet, for all his acquisitions, he felt utterly, profoundly empty. His days were a blur of meetings, spreadsheets, and power lunches where conversations were a delicate dance of veiled agendas.
He excelled at it, he truly did.
He could dissect market trends, predict consumer behavior with unnerving accuracy, and deliver presentations that left clients mesmerized.
But the thrill, if it had ever truly existed, had long since faded. Each triumph, each promotion, felt less like a step up and more like another brick added to the walls of his self-made prison.
He was a master architect of other people's dreams, but his own had crumbled into dust years ago, leaving only a vast, echoing void.
Sleep offered little respite.
Often, he'd wake in the pre-dawn silence, a cold knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He'd stare at the perfectly plastered ceiling, the designer lamp shedding a sterile glow, and wonder, is this it?
Is this all there is?
He tried to recall a time when he felt genuine excitement, genuine joy.
Faint memories of childhood building elaborate forts, losing himself in the pages of an adventure book, the scent of damp earth after a summer rain flickered like dying embers, too distant to warm him. His relationships were equally transactional.
Colleagues were competitors, friends were networking opportunities, and the few romantic liaisons he'd attempted had withered under the weight of his emotional unavailability.
He was present in body, but his spirit was perpetually adrift, searching for something it couldn't name.
The tipping point arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper.
It was a Tuesday late afternoon.
Arthur had just closed a monumental deal, one that would cement his firm's position in the global market. The office buzzed with congratulatory murmurs, champagne corks popped, and his boss clapped him on the back with genuine admiration.
Arthur smiled, accepted the praise, but inside, a profound silence descended. There was no elation, no sense of accomplishment, just a deeper, colder echo of emptiness.
Later that evening, alone in his apartment, he stood by the panoramic window, the city lights shimmering below like a scattered galaxy. He saw a million lives, a million stories unfolding, and felt utterly disconnected from all of them.
He wasn't living.
He was existing, a cog in a vast, indifferent machine.
A single tear, unbidden, traced a path down his cheek, a tear not of sadness, but of a profound, bone-deep weariness. He was tired of the charade, tired of being someone he wasn't, tired of chasing phantom goals that offered no sustenance. He remembered a conversation with an older colleague, Eleanor, who had recently retired to pursue her passion for ceramics.
She had looked at him with gentle pity, her eyes seeing past his polished facade. "Arthur," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "you're so busy building your kingdom, you've forgotten to live in it."
What truly nourishes your soul? He had scoffed then, dismissed it as retiree sentimentality.
Now, Eleanor's words resonated with an agonizing clarity. The next morning, Arthur did something impulsive, something completely out of character. He walked into his boss's office, not for a meeting, but to tender his resignation.
His boss, a man who prided himself on his unflappable composure, stared at him, dumbfounded. "Thorne, are you mad? You're at the peak of your career."
"What will you do?" Arthur looked out at the city, at the gleaming cage, and for the first time in years, a faint spark ignited within him. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice surprisingly steady.
"But I have to find out." He sold his apartment, much of its impersonal contents along with it.
He packed a single duffel bag with essentials, a worn copy of Walden, and a blank journal he'd bought on a whim.
He booked a train ticket to a place he'd stumbled upon in a travel magazine, a remote coastal town called Oakhaven, nestled between ancient forests and a restless sea, renowned for its artisanal crafts and quiet way of life. He knew nothing about it, and that was precisely the appeal. He needed to be lost to find himself. The journey was a slow unwinding. As the city receded, replaced by rolling hills, then dense woods, Then the first glimpse of the vast, shimmering ocean, Arthur felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease.
The air grew cleaner, scented with salt and pine.
The incessant hum of traffic gave way to the rhythmic crash of waves. Oakhaven was everything his former life was not. Old weathered buildings huddled together against the elements, their windows glowing with warm, inviting light. The streets were cobbled, winding, and alive with the casual chatter of locals. There were no towering glass structures, no hurried commuters, just the rhythm of the tides, the cry of gulls, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with brine.
He rented a small, unassuming cottage near the harbour, its walls painted a cheerful blue, its windows framing a view of fishing boats bobbing gently in the bay. For the first few days, Arthur felt completely adrift. He tried to apply his old routines, making lists, setting goals, planning his self-discovery process. But Oakhaven refused to be quantified.
The internet was spotty, the shops closed when they pleased, and the locals moved at a pace that felt almost meditative.
He went for long walks, his mind still buzzing with corporate anxieties, his body feeling oddly cumbersome.
He tried to read, but his restless mind wouldn't settle. He was a seer without a company, a strategist without a strategy, and the emptiness he'd tried to escape seemed to have followed him, albeit in a quieter, more insidious form.
One afternoon, drawn by the faint scent of sawdust and beeswax, he wandered into a small, unassuming workshop tucked away down a narrow alley.
It was filled with the warm, earthy aroma of wood, the glint of hand tools, and the quiet presence of an old man hunched over a workbench. The man, Elias, was a boat builder, or so Arthur learned from a faded sign above the door.
His hands were gnarled and powerful, stained with the patina of decades of honest labour. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched with a quiet wisdom. His eyes a startling shade of sea blue, twinkling with a knowing calm. Arthur, accustomed to sleek, modern showrooms, felt out of place amidst the organized chaos of wood shavings, half-finished planks, and ancient tools hanging on pegboards. He felt compelled to speak, to explain himself, but Elias simply offered a small, welcoming nod, then went back to sanding a piece of mahogany with slow, deliberate strokes. Arthur stood there for a long time watching. Elias didn't rush, didn't fuss.
Each movement was purposeful, connected.
He didn't just sand the wood.
He seemed to converse with it, coaxing out its inherent beauty. The silence was deep, comforting, broken only by the rasp of sandpaper and the distant cry of a gull. Something shifted within Arthur.
He felt a faint flicker of curiosity, something beyond the analytical, problem-solving mind.
He returned to Elias's workshop the next day, and the day after that.
Slowly, tentatively, he began to ask questions. Elias answered sparingly, in parables and observations, never lecturing.
Every piece of wood has a story, Elias said one day, holding up a gnarled piece of oak.
You listen to it, you respect it, and you help it become what it was meant to be, not what you demand it to be.
Arthur, ever the corporate efficiency expert, offered to help.
Elias handed him a small, dull piece of sandpaper and pointed to a stack of rough-hewn planks. Start here. Take your time.
Feel the grain.
Arthur, initially, was frustrated. His hands felt clumsy, his movements awkward. He tried to sand quickly, to finish the task, but Elias's gentle gaze was a constant reminder to slow down. The first few planks looked uneven, scarred.
He felt a familiar surge of self-criticism, the voice of his old life whispering, "You're failing, even at this simple task."
But Elias simply examined his work, nodded, and pointed out a subtle improvement, a smoother patch, a more consistent rhythm. Progress, not perfection, he'd say, his voice like the gentle lapping of waves against the shore.
Patience is a muscle, Arthur. You must exercise it.
Days turned into weeks. Arthur learned to sharpen tools, to mix paints, to mend nets with the local fishermen.
He learned to differentiate between different types of wood by scent and texture. He discovered the meditative quality of repetitive tasks, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a raw material transformed by his own hands. The corporate anxiety that had once defined him began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of focus and calm.
His hands, once soft and accustomed only to keyboards, grew calloused and strong.
He started waking up not with dread, but with a quiet anticipation for the day's work, for the sea air, for the conversations with Elias that were always laced with profound insights. He rediscovered the simple pleasure of a well-made meal, a strong cup of coffee, the warmth of the sun on his face. He started noticing the vibrant colors of the fishing boats, the intricate patterns on seashores, the way the light danced on the water at sunset.
His senses, long dulled by urban life, began to awaken.
One evening, after a particularly challenging day of shaping a stubborn piece of timber, Arthur sat by the pier, watching the stars emerge like scattered diamonds on black velvet. He pulled out the blank journal he'd carried for months. For the first time, words flowed effortlessly onto the page. Not corporate jargon, but raw, unfiltered thoughts and feelings.
He wrote about the wood, about the sea, about Elias's quiet wisdom. He wrote about the shame of his past emptiness, and the hesitant hope that was now beginning to bloom.
He remembered a profound quote Elias had casually uttered a few days prior, while they were discussing the pressure to conform, to follow predetermined paths.
Elias had quoted it almost as an aside, but it had resonated deeply with Arthur.
Now, Arthur meticulously transcribed it into his journal, feeling its truth sink deep into his bones. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph Waldo Emerson. He paused, pin-poised. To be yourself. Who was Arthur? Not the corporate executive, not the empty shell.
He was a man who found joy in the smell of sawdust, in the patient shaping of wood, in the camaraderie of a small community. He was a man who had been lost, but was now slowly, meticulously finding his way home, not to a place, but to himself.
He began to see his past differently, not as a complete waste, but as a path that, however circuitous, had led him here.
His analytical mind, his ability to plan and strategize, these weren't inherently bad tools.
They had simply been used to build the wrong things.
A few months into his stay, Oakhaven faced a challenge. The younger generation was leaving for the cities. The traditional crafts were struggling to find new markets, and the town's unique charm was slowly fading.
Elias, ever practical, sighed.
We build beautiful things, Arthur.
But the world changes. People don't know where to look for them anymore. A spark, familiar yet entirely new, ignited in Arthur. His old skills, his corporate acumen, stirred within him. But now they were infused with a different purpose.
He saw the potential, the stories waiting to be told.
Elias, Arthur began, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. What if we brought Oakhaven to the world, but on our terms? What if we celebrated the authenticity, the craftsmanship, the stories behind every piece?
Elias raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity in his sea-blue eyes. Arthur, no longer the slick corporate pitchman, but a man driven by genuine passion, began to outline his vision.
He proposed a cooperative, a digital platform to showcase Oakhaven's artisans, the potters, the weavers, the boat builders, the woodcarvers. He envisioned rich storytelling, high-quality photographs and videos that captured the essence of the town and its people. He spoke of sustainable practices, fair trade, and preserving the unique heritage of Oakhaven. Initially, there was skepticism.
Arthur was still the city man, but his sincerity, his willingness to work alongside them, to listen, and to genuinely understand their craft, slowly won them over. He spent weeks documenting the processes, interviewing the artisans, learning about their lives and their connection to their work.
He applied his strategic mind not to maximizing profit, but to maximizing impact, to fostering a thriving, sustainable community. He built a website, simple yet elegant, that told Oakhaven's story.
He used his understanding of digital marketing to reach a global audience, but with a focus on genuine connection, not fleeting trends.
He organized local workshops, inviting visitors to experience the crafts firsthand, to connect with the makers, to feel the wood, the clay, the yarn.
The first few months were challenging. There were technical glitches, logistical hurdles, and moments of doubt.
But Arthur, drawing on the patience Elias had instilled in him, persevered. He no longer sought instant gratification.
He embraced the process, the slow, steady building, like shaping a boat one plank at a time.
Then, slowly, the tide began to turn.
Orders started coming in, not just for products, but for bespoke pieces, for commissions, for workshops.
Visitors, drawn by the authentic narratives and the promise of genuine connection, began to arrive, filling the quaint guest houses and bringing new life to the quiet streets. The young people who had left for the city started to return, seeing a future in their hometown, a chance to blend tradition with innovation. The climax arrived during Oakhaven's annual craft festival, a tradition that had been slowly dwindling. This year, thanks to Arthur's efforts, it was a vibrant explosion of life. The harbour was abuzz, the stores overflowing with exquisite handcrafted goods.
Laughter and music filled the air. Tourists mingled with locals, sharing stories, breaking bread.
Elias, leaning against a newly finished boat, watched Arthur moving through the crowd, a genuine smile on his face, his eyes alight with purpose.
Arthur was no longer the empty, driven man from the city.
He was vibrant, engaged, connected.
He greeted people by name, his hands gesturing expressively as he explained the intricacies of a pottery glaze or the history of a hand-woven rug.
He was a part of Oakhaven, not an observer. He had found his true self, not in a grand, dramatic revelation, but in the quiet, consistent act of being present, of serving a purpose larger than himself.
He still had challenges, of course.
Life was not a straight line.
But now, he faced them with a newfound resilience, a profound sense of groundedness.
He had learned that true success wasn't measured in zeros on a bank statement, but in the richness of his connections, the authenticity of his days, and the quiet satisfaction of contributing something meaningful to the world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Arthur walked with Elias along the beach. The air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed.
"You found your way, Arthur," Elias said, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of the sea. Arthur smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes.
"I found a way to use the gifts I had, Elias, but for something that truly matters. I stopped trying to be who the world told me I should be, and started embracing who I truly am." He looked out at the ocean, vast and mysterious, reflecting the infinite possibilities he now saw in his own life.
The emptiness was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of purpose, a warmth that filled him to the brim.
His life was no longer a polished, vacant stage, but a vibrant, unfolding story, handcrafted with care and brimming with authentic joy. He was finally truly alive.